Notre Dame's first official practice of the preseason is in the books, and there were some very important takeaways, but most notably, it looks like Notre Dame's best player is going to be ready to go for the season opener. More on that coming right up.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. And today is Thursday, August 1st. And thank you for getting your day started right here by making this your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Tyler Wojak. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And you can watch the show on YouTube, or you can listen wherever it is that you get your podcast. If you are watching along on YouTube, this is a reminder to please like the video below by hitting that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're listening to the podcast, please rate the show 5 stars, leave a review if you're feeling extra generous, and of course, subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, let's get into it. Today, we're going to talk about practice, an important practice, the very first practice with the full Notre Dame football team ahead of the 2024 season as the Irish kicked off their preseason camp on Wednesday morning. And as head coach Marcus Freeman pointed out in his press conference afterwards, it was a pretty typical first day. A lot of good, a lot of things you can improve upon, but hey, even a typical day can be revealing, and I have several takeaways from this practice and the ensuing comments made by Freeman. But the biggest news of the day, and arguably the biggest news of fall camp, is that 3 of Notre Dame's best players, who all came into camp with health questions, were all out there practicing and looked ready to go for the season opener. I'm talking about cornerback Benjamin Morrison, quarterback Riley Leonard, and tight end Mitchell Evans. Now, they're all recovering, and their timelines are all in a little bit different pace based on the different injuries that they experienced. But let's start with Benjamin Morrison, because this was the most critical one out of all of them. There was the most vagueness with Morrison compared to any of these other guys, because we all saw when Riley Leonard went down last year at the end of the Notre Dame Duke game. We're pretty familiar with his injury and the ensuing surgeries that he had at the beginning of this year. Mitchell Evans, we all saw him go down against Pittsburgh. We know that he had a torn ACL, torn MCL, and we know how his timeline lined up. We don't really know as much about what happened with Benjamin Morrison. We just know that he underwent shoulder surgery during spring practice, and his recovery timeline was a little bit uncertain. When Marcus Freeman talked about it in May, it was still pretty vague. He made it seem like he was going to be a part of fall camp, but we didn't really know the extent of it, and there were some serious concerns about whether or not he would be ready to go in the season opener. But based on what we saw in the first practice, it looks like Benjamin Morrison is well on his way to playing in that Texas A&M game, because he was not out there with the red jersey. He was very active, and even though the team wasn't wearing pads and they weren't tackling or anything like that, Benjamin Morrison was basically full go for as much as you could be in a practice like this. And there was even a point where he dove on a loose ball. And look, I love the effort, I love the intensity, but I'm sitting there thinking like, hey, that's great that Benjamin Morrison is diving on loose balls, but can we take it a little bit easy? It is the first day, and you are recovering from a pretty significant shoulder surgery. So I like it, but let's dial it back just a little bit, because Notre Dame really, really needs him for the Texas A&M game and obviously the full season afterwards. The way Freeman talked about it afterwards, he made it seem like he's a little bit more advanced in his recovery than maybe they even expected. But at this point, it seems like the only thing that could prevent Morrison from playing against Texas A&M would be if he suffered a setback to that shoulder during camp, or if he suffered a new injury, because based on what he did in that first practice, he looks ready to go. And that is absolutely massive for this Notre Dame defense, because we know the defense is going to be really good. They looked really, really good in this practice. They're really deep. They can rotate tons of guys in with the starters, and the twos are a lot better than the twos on the offense. And we kind of knew all that going into camp. But if Notre Dame's defense is going to be as good as they need to be in order to achieve all their goals this season, with a college football playoff berth and then a run once they're there, they absolutely need a shutdown corner, and Benjamin Morrison is absolutely that. And if he's not out there, that defense is just, it's really good, or maybe even good going up against better teams. But now that he's out there, and the fact that he's going to be able to be a participant throughout this camp is absolutely huge for this defense, because now he's not going to be as rusty in that season opener. So that was really, really important, and obviously great news for Notre Dame. And then there's Riley Leonard. He was also full go in practice today, but by all accounts, he was a little bit rusty, and that's okay. That's to be expected. He was probably not as accurate as you'd like your starting quarterback to be, but again, it's the first practice of the camp, and it's his first real practice in several months because he missed almost the entire spring practice session. So I'm not surprised that his accuracy was a little bit up and down. Steve Angeli's was a little bit up and down as well. And I think with Leonard, like, even though he was able to get a lot of reps with his wide receivers over the course of the summer, Marcus Freeman even mentioned that afterwards, that Riley Leonard did the best he could to kind of make up for lost time by getting together with some of the Notre Dame wide receivers and tight ends over the summer and getting reps with them. Like, that's great. Really happy that he was able to do that. It's still not the same as when you're out there with a defense coming at you. A defense that's not even wearing pads, by the way, but having to make, you know, your first read, your second read, and your third read, and then having to make a play when you got the defense bearing down on you. That is much, much different than running routes on air in the summer. So it's not shocking that he was a little bit rusty in this practice, but I do think it was noteworthy that he was even out there, that he was running around, and he said he cut it loose this summer. Didn't seem like he was dealing with any nagging pain in his ankle, and I think that is the most important thing, right, with Leonard, because if he was hobbling around, if he didn't look comfortable moving around, then all of a sudden you have to think about how much you want to use him at all over the course of these next few weeks because you want to prevent something more serious from happening. But as long as he's out there, it's better for him to make those mistakes now in practice than when he's actually in the game. I think that over the course of camp, Riley Leonard is going to be the most improved player from the first practice to the last, given the circumstances when he started and how valuable these reps are going to be that he gets with his receivers and his tight ends in a real live practice setting over the course of these next few weeks. So I'm not worried at all about Leonard. I'm just happy that he was even out there moving around. And lastly, we've got Mitchell Evans at tight end. He probably was held back the most compared to Benjamin Morrison or Riley Leonard. He did go out there with the ones during the skeleton start of practice where they're kind of out there running formations and stuff, running tempo, but they're not going live against a defense or anything like that. So that's good. The fact that he was even out there participating in that drill with the starters is good, but he was pretty limited the rest of practice. He was still wearing a brace on his knee. I think it's just good that he's out there at all. I didn't know if he was going to be a participant in this practice. It was something that I was looking for going into today. But he was out there, he was moving around, and I think he's well on his way to being ready to go for the season opener. Marcus Freeman said afterwards that all of these guys are on return to play protocol, which makes total sense given the circumstances that they were dealing with going into camp. But this was one of my biggest questions, and it pertained to all three of these guys. What is their health status going to be at the start of the season, and what are we going to see at the start of camp that's going to sort of dictate what their status is once they play Texas A&M. And honestly, for every single one of these guys, it looks like some significant progress was made, and they all look ready to go. But I still think the most important one was Benjamin Morrison, just given the uncertainty and given the fact that Benjamin Morrison is the best player on this Notre Dame team. Like, they really, really need him to be out there full go, and it looks like he's going to be ready for that. And I think that's really, really encouraging for Notre Dame because, look, it's the first practice. It's not going to be the most exciting thing you've ever seen. So as long as you can check off these boxes, these questions that you have going into it, and you can check those off on the first day, I think that's a really good place to be for Notre Dame. All right, coming up, one of the most important position battles going into camp might already be settled. How did it happen, and what does it mean for Notre Dame? That's next on Locked On Irish. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. And with great last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Whether you've been planning to go to a game for weeks, or if you're feeling spontaneous and you want to hit up the nearby ballpark, Gametime is the perfect place for you. I just used Gametime, I think it was last week or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, to go to a Dodgers game, and it was great. Wasn't even planning on doing it during the day. Then I was like, you know what? It's a beautiful day. I'd like to go see some baseball. Looked at the price on Gametime, and it was perfect, and I ended up having a great time, all thanks to Gametime. It is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy. My favorite thing about Gametime is the pricing shows your total cost up front, and you can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The other big headline coming out of Notre Dame's first practice is that it appears that Emil Wagner is going to start at right tackle over Tosh Baker. And up until about last week, it seemed like the right tackle position would be one of the most intriguing battles going into camp. Then around that time, I heard from 2 different sources that Wagner had basically won the job already, and he got all the first-team reps in the summer. Now, if you're wondering, Well, what do you mean he got all the first team reps in the summer? Is the team really practicing? I just thought they were working out and conditioning. That's mostly true, but I can promise you that all these programs from all across the country are getting in some field work over the summer. Now, they obviously have to abide by NCAA rules, but there's certainly ways to go around it. And it reminds me of a story I heard from one of my best friends from high school. Him and I played football together, and then he got into coaching, and he shadowed a really big-time college football program early on in his coaching days, and he told me that he was there in the summer and thought he'd just see like a couple workouts, nothing too exciting, and then the position coach that he was shadowing took him out to the field, and they ran a full practice. It looked like a middle-of-the-season type of deal. They just weren't wearing any pads or anything like that, and instead of using an actual football, they used a Nerf ball because they legally are not allowed to use a football, and they found a way around it, and it was a way to sort of run the offense, work on installs, formations, all those things that you can do without an actual football. So trust me when I tell you that these teams are getting reps and they're trying to figure out who their starters are going to be over the summer, even though they aren't officially practicing yet. So it seems like during this time, Wagner jumped Tosh Baker, and I'm not really surprised by it. I always felt like Emil Wagner would eventually beat out Tosh Baker, although I did think that the competition would be pretty close to around dead even. And I figured, okay, if it's very close at the start, maybe it makes more sense to start Tosh Baker against Texas A&M because he has experience. He started a few games before in the past. And is it really what you want to do to bring in Emil Wagner to make his first career start on the road at Kyle Field in a very hostile environment? Well, if he's the better player, then yeah, that's what you're going to want to do. And I think that some fans have already been asking, like, wait a second, why would you put Wagner out there already? Like, I thought Tosh, he's older, he's got the experience. Look, man, if Emil Wagner is better than Tosh Baker, you're going to put the better player out there. You're going to have more trust in him to do his job and make sure that he executes whatever his assignment is on every single play better than the guy who is now his backup in Tosh Baker. And don't get me wrong, Notre Dame definitely needs Tosh Baker around, even if he's not a starter, because he gives you depth at the tackle position, which Notre Dame does not have a lot of right now. And I just think that Emil Wagner always had a higher ceiling. The biggest question around him was his size, and it looks like at this point in his career, he's been in a college weight program for several years now. He is strong enough to hold up on a really good offensive line, or what should be a good offensive line as the season progresses, and the Notre Dame coaching staff trusts him a little bit more. Marcus Freeman said afterwards that what Emil Wagner has done both in spring and throughout the summer has given Coach Rudolph, the offensive line coach, trust in him to take those starting reps at the start of camp. And I really don't think that this is a battle anymore. I think Emil Wagner has pretty much won the job unless his play seriously deteriorates over the course of these next few weeks, but I don't really see that happening. And I also think that you're going to want to get as many reps with all five of these guys out there because the more time that you can have with your five starters out there working together as a unit, I feel like you can develop the chemistry quicker and you're going to be in better shape going up against Texas A&M. Now, the thing is, that's not the only position battle going on in the offensive line. Now it seems like the only position battle left is the left guard spot, and that's happening between Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler. If 4 out of the 5 spots in the starting offensive line are in control, there's one left, and it's a really interesting battle because Coogan is the only lineman who started every single game for Notre Dame last season, but now he's in a heated battle with Rocco Spindler, and this is a really good battle because Pat Coogan went out there with the ones at first in the skeleton drills, but then Spindler ran out with the ones at the end when they were going more 11 on 11. I think that this could go on for the next couple weeks. Eventually, they're going to have to make a decision, and then they're going to want to give the bulk of the reps to whoever they decide is going to be the starter. But it's a really interesting battle. Spindler is also recovering from major knee surgery that he suffered last year in the Clemson game when he initially suffered that injury. So I think it's going to be Spindler. I think he has a higher ceiling. But that being said, Pat Coogan is a really good piece to have on the offensive line because he can be a backup at the left guard and the right guard spot if something were to happen to Spindler or Stroud. But this is something that's going to be very interesting to monitor over the course of these next few weeks because now you look at the makeup of the offensive line. You've got Charles Jagasaw at left tackle, young guy who the Notre Dame staff is really high on. Then at left guard, you've got the competition with Coogan and Spindler. At center, I mean, the hype around Ashton Craig is building. The way that Mike Denbrock talked about him in an article with Pete Sampson of The Athletic, he's extremely high on him. I had Tim Priester on earlier this week. He thinks that by the end of the season, we're going to be talking about Ashton Craig as a future All-American. Billy Schrauth has the chance to really break out this season at right guard. And then if Emil Wagner has already secured that right tackle spot, it makes you feel a little bit better about the offensive line. It's still my biggest concern about the team. I still need to see it to believe it that this group can be really good. But I think that they're making serious progress there. And Emil Wagner looked really good out there in that practice today. Again, hard to evaluate offensive linemen when they're not wearing pads and the defense isn't wearing pads either. But still, the fact that he's making these strides is very encouraging. And now all eyes are going to be on the left guard spot to see what happens there. Again, I think it's going to be Spindler, even though he might not be as consistent as Coogan. I think he's just a better player overall, and I think that he is going to be what Notre Dame chooses to be as the starting left guard. And then you'd have a starting unit of Jagasaw, Spindler, Craig, Schrauth, and Wagner. An inexperienced group, but one that is loaded with talent, and I feel like as the season progresses, they could get a lot better and then eventually develop into a strength of the team, even if I'm very concerned about what they are today. Although one key position battle on offense might be over before it started, it looks like another one might be emerging on defense that I didn't expect. More on that right after this. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. I recently used eBay Motors because I was dealing with an issue with my headlights. I was looking around, asking different mechanics, hey, can you get this fixed? I didn't really like the prices that they were offering. Then I remembered, oh yeah, eBay Motors. Looked there, got my headlight fixed, much cheaper than the rest, and I was really, really happy with the product. So you should check out eBay Motors and keep your ride or die alive at ebay.com/motors. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. So one position battle that I didn't really expect to see at the start of camp was safety, specifically the safety spot opposite Xavier Watts. And it looks like we've got one between Adon Schuler and Rod Hurd, because Schuler was splitting reps with Hurd as the starting safety today. And Mark Streven spoke about it afterwards and said they're both going to play a lot this season. I figured Schuler would absolutely be in the rotation. He's the third safety, but the fact that he was out there with the ones is pretty telling to me. And it's important for several reasons. We know Hurd is a good player from what he did at Northwestern. I understand that Northwestern was absolutely terrible this past season before that, but still, Rod Hurd has played over 2,000 snaps of college football in his career, and he's been a good player. He's pretty consistent. Might not be the playmaker that Xavier Watts is, but still, he has shown that he's a quality football player. So the fact that Schuler is already as good as him, maybe he's even better if he ends up winning this job, that really bodes well for Schuler and the defense. It also gives Notre Dame some options to move Hurd to nickel, because that is his natural position. That's what he played at Northwestern these past couple of seasons, but Notre Dame wanted him to play safety because they needed a safety, and they already added Jordan Clark to be the starting nickel. So I'm not saying that Hurd is now going to be in a competition with Jordan Clark, but if Clark does need a break, then you can move Hurd to play nickel, and then Schuler could come in to play safety if Hurd ends up winning the job. Like, it just gives you a little bit more opportunities there with your defense, because I think depth is a concern for the defensive backs ever since Clarence Lewis left and Micah Bell left in the transfer portal. It's why Notre Dame was looking at some defensive backs in the transfer portal. I think they offered two guys during the spring cycle, I should say. So that's something to keep an eye out for. It also brings up another player that did not have a really good day in practice, and that was cornerback Chance Tucker. It sounds like he just had an awful day, and maybe his worst day ever at Notre Dame, because he was holding a lot, and even though he was holding, he was getting beat a lot. Marcus Freeman really got on him at one point in practice because he wasn't hustling back to the huddle. And look, I understand if you're having a bad day and it's really tough out there, but if you're not hustling on top of that, that's just going to make matters worse. And I think that's why Marcus Freeman yelled at him in the way that he did. And then after the practice, Marcus Freeman said that Notre Dame needs one of their true freshmen, either Carson Hobbs or Leonard Moore, to emerge, because that fourth cornerback spot is open. We thought Chance Tucker would have that. Doesn't appear that's going to be the case. So now you really just have Benjamin Morrison, Christian Gray and Jane Mickey as the corners. And don't get me wrong, if they're healthy, they are going to play the bulk of the snaps. Then you have Jordan Clark at nickel. And then behind them, what do you have? You have Chance Tucker, who struggled, and then you have two true freshmen who we don't really know that much about just yet. Again, Harbs and or more could emerge over the course of these next few weeks, and Notre Dame really needs one of them too because they need some depth there. But again, now that you have Hurd and Schuler battling it out, it means that you have another option, and Hurd can basically act as a de facto cornerback as the nickel. So that is a really encouraging sign for the Notre Dame defense. I was on Greg Flamung's podcast yesterday, and then he was on mine as well to preview fall camp, and we talked about a guy who could have a potential Kyron Williams level breakout during fall camp because no one was really talking about Kyron Williams. Then he dominated camp, and then he just secured the starting running back spot and was one of the best running backs in the country. Greg pointed out that if Schuler ends up just being the better safety, that bodes really well for the Notre Dame defense because you can still use Hurd, and also Schuler is going to be the guy going beyond this year. Notre Dame is going to have to replace Xavier Watts and Rod Hurd, so it would just mean a lot for the future of this defense if Schuler ends up being a really good player. So that was really encouraging. We also have a couple other news and notes from the first practice. Linebacker Kahanu Kia is out for the season. Tough break for him. It looks like he suffered a torn ACL in the summer, and he missed his first 2 years of college football because he was on a church mission trip. So first year back playing football, he led both teams in tackles in the spring game. So you thought, even if Kahanu Kia isn't going to be like out there with the starters or anything like that, maybe he could get in the mix a little bit in the rotation. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case this year because he's going to miss the entire season while he recovers from the torn ACL. On a positive note, wide receiver Bo Collins, the transfer from Clemson, was really impressive in the first practice. One of the wide receivers who stood out, Marcus Freeman even mentioned him after the practice. Notre Dame really needs him to hit. They have Jane Thomas right now as the boundary receiver, even though I don't think Jane Thomas really wants to be the boundary receiver. He wants to play in the slot. Notre Dame needs a true boundary. Bo Collins has the size and the ability to be that guy. He made a great catch downfield at one point in the practice, and I think that if he ends up being really good, that would be really, really important for this Notre Dame wide receiver core because they really need all of those transfers to hit, but specifically Bo Collins. And I'll admit, I wasn't as high on him as some were when he committed to Notre Dame. I thought it was a good ad for sure, but you look at his stats, he had like 35 catches, 3 touchdowns. His stat sheet wasn't really doing a ton for me. He did have a problem with drops at Clemson. He had 5 drops last year. So I was a little bit skeptical, but hey, that doesn't mean that he can't really improve at Notre Dame. I mean, look, we know the Notre Dame offense hasn't been great the past couple of years. The Clemson offense has been struggling for a long time as well. So now with this new look offense under Mike Denbrock, with Riley Leonard throwing him the ball, maybe the best is yet to come with Bo Collins. And that certainly looks like a possibility after the practice that he had on Wednesday. Last thing I wanted to mention, looks like Notre Dame has a good kicker and a punter. James Rindell, the Australian punter, was apparently wowing the crowd in practice with some of his punts. Now, he did have a couple miss hits. I think that's going to happen as he sort of acclimates to American football. He's going from Australian football to American football. I don't think he's going to be nervous when he's out there on the field, but I think that he still needs all the reps necessary to get that just down to a science for him where he doesn't even have to think about it. But at one point, it was reported by John Bryce that he had a 66-yard punt, and I'm talking 66 yards in the air, not like took a bounce at the 50 and then kept rolling. No, this kid has got an absolute, I shouldn't say kid because I think he's like 26 or something. He's only a couple years younger than me. But still, that's encouraging because at one point, when Luke Smith and I were on, we were like, does Notre Dame have a good punter? Are we sure this guy's going to be good? I think that is going to ease some concerns. And also, Mitch Jeter, the kicker, the transfer from South Carolina, he had a pretty good day in practice as well. He did miss one, but it wasn't a bad miss or anything like that. Other than that, he was extremely accurate, and that's a really good thing because, as I've said before, when it comes to Mitch Jeter, like, the Spencer Schrader experiment last year was fun when he was booting kicks from like 56 yards out. But every time he came out there, I was just like, I have no idea what to expect right now. Like, he's going to boom it, but God knows where it's going to end up. It doesn't seem like we're going to deal with that with Mitch Jeter. He's going to be out there. He's going to be a little bit more consistent and a little bit more reliable, even if he doesn't quite have the same leg strength as Schrader did. So overall, again, typical day like Marcus Freeman said, but I still think there were some very important things that were revealed. And now as the rest of camp plays out, I think we're going to have a little bit more questions. The safety spot is something that's going to be interesting to follow. Left guard, also going to be something that's really interesting and is going to shape the offensive line going forward. But overall, man, the defense looks great. The offense looked a little rusty at first. That's to be expected, especially when you're going up against a defense as good as Notre Dame's has in practice every day. I think that's going to bode well for both sides. And yeah, man, I feel excited. I'm really excited to be talking about football. And we are so close to the start of the season, just under a month away, and I cannot wait. But that is going to do it for me today. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish first listen of the day. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning, but instead of doing a mailbag like I had originally planned, I'm going to be joined by Locked On recruiting insider Brian Smith to discuss the latest on Deuce Knight's recruitment. I know there are a lot of questions about him right now from the fan base. That situation right now has taken a turn. Deuce Knight did take a visit to Auburn this past weekend. He also took a visit to Ole Miss on Tuesday. So Brian and I reacted to that news, and we try to dive into it as much as we possibly can, because even though he's still committed to Notre Dame, it does look like the commitment has opened up in a way that a lot of people feared, and now it is the reality. But he is still committed to Notre Dame. He's still the highest rated commit in this class, and Notre Dame is just going to have to work really hard to keep him and get him to sign on signing day. So tune in to that tomorrow for the latest. Also, remember to subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I'll see you tomorrow.